The porcelain cup felt like a leaden weight in Eleanor Thorne's hand, its delicate handle slick with the cold sweat of her own palms. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of her Chicago penthouse, casting fractured patterns of ruby and sapphire across the dark oak of the boardroom table. Yet the room felt devoid of warmth. Before her sat a document that would strip her of everything she had spent 40 years building a legal severance of her soul from the steel and glass empire known as Thorne Global Dynamic. Her son, Alistair, adjusted his gold cufflinks with a rhythmic metallic clicking that grated against Eleanor's frayed nerves, while his wife Vivienne leaned forward with a smile that was far too sharp to be comforting. The steam rising from the coffee Vivienne had prepared carried a faint, unidentifiable scent, something metallic and sharp that cut through the rich aroma of the dark roast. Eleanor raised the cup to her lips, her vision blurring for a moment as a wave of nausea rolled through her, but before the liquid could touch her tongue, Sophia, the housekeeper, who had been the silent pulse of the Thorne household for 3 decades, suddenly lurched forward. In an expertly executed accident, Sophia tripped over the edge of the hand-woven rug, her shoulder colliding with Eleanor's arm and sending the blue porcelain shattering against the edge of the table. As the dark liquid seeped into the white lace tablecloth, like an encroaching shadow, Sophia knelt to gather the shards, her fingers brushing Eleanor's knee as she whispered a warning so quiet it was almost a breath. "Do not drink another drop, Eleanor. Just trust me and stay awake." Eleanor Thorne was a woman forged in the fires of the Midwestern manufacturing boom. A 67-year-old titan who had started with a single machine shop in a dusty corner of Illinois. Alongside her late husband, Arthur, she had navigated the treacherous waters of international trade labor strikes and economic collapses, emerging not just as a survivor, but as a queen of industry. When Arthur passed away from a sudden stroke 12 years ago, the board of directors had expected Eleanor to sell her shares and fade into a quiet life of gardening and charity galas. Instead, she had tightened her grip on the company, expanding their reach into renewable energy and aerospace technology, growing their net worth to a staggering $15 million. She had done it all for Alistair, her only child, the boy she had raised on stories of hard work and integrity. But as Alistair grew, the integrity seemed to wither, replaced by a hollow sense of entitlement and a thirst for the lifestyle of a man who had never known the grit of a factory floor. Alistair was 40 years old now, a man of expensive tailored suits, and a growing resentment for the mother who still held the keys to the kingdom. Vivienne had entered the picture 6 years ago, a former research chemist with an analytical mind and a social ambition that was as vast as it was cold. She had quickly positioned herself as Eleanor's confidante, the daughter-in-law, who was always there with a supportive word or a carefully prepared meal. But in the last 6 months, Eleanor's health had taken a mysterious and terrifying turn. What began as simple fatigue soon escalated into bouts of vertigo, a persistent, metallic taste in her mouth, and a cognitive fog that made it difficult to recall the details of complex contracts. Her physician, a man who had treated the Thorne family for decades, had found no clear cause, suggesting that perhaps the weight of the company was finally becoming too much for a woman of her age. It was Vivienne who had suggested the succession plan, Vivienne, who had drafted the initial transfer of power, and Vivienne, who had taken over the preparation of Eleanor's morning coffee, insisting that Sophia had enough to do with the heavy cleaning. The boardroom was a sanctuary of memory, filled with the sketches of Arthur's first patents and the heavy, masculine scent of old leather and tobacco. On this particular Thursday, however, the air felt charged with a different energy, a predatory stillness that made the hair on Eleanor's neck stand up. She looked at the spilled coffee, the dark stain spreading across the table like a map of a lost country. Alistair sighed, a sound of profound disappointment that echoed through the quiet room. "Sophia, really, you're becoming quite a liability," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "That was a Ming reproduction. I'll have to see about finding someone more capable if you can't manage a simple tray." Vivienne reached out a hand, her fingers grazing Eleanor's wrist. "It's all right, Mother. Sophia is just tired. Let me get you a fresh cup. You need to be sharp for the signing." Eleanor felt a sudden, icy clarity. The dizziness that had been her constant companion for weeks seemed to retreat, pushed back by a surge of adrenaline. She looked at Sophia, who was still on the floor, her eyes fixed on the shards of porcelain, with an intensity that signalled a deeper desperation. Sophia had been there when Alistair took his first steps. She had held Eleanor's hand through the long, lonely nights after Arthur's funeral, and she was the only person who knew the true rhythm of the Thorne household. If Sophia was afraid, there was a reason. "I think I've had enough caffeine for one morning," Alistair Eleanor said, her voice regaining the steel that had made her a legend in the industry. "Perhaps we should discuss the third clause of the transfer before we worry about the coffee. I noticed a discrepancy in the asset allocation for the employee pension fund." Vivienne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in her polished facade. "We can certainly look at that, Mother, but wouldn't it be easier to just sign the master agreement first? Our legal team has already vetted everything." She moved toward the sideboard, where a second carafe of coffee sat warming over a small flame. Eleanor watched her, noting the way Vivienne's body shielded her movements, the subtle twitch of her shoulder as she reached into the pocket of her silk blazer. In that moment, Eleanor realized that she wasn't just in a business meeting, she was in a combat zone. The son she had loved and the woman he had chosen were not waiting for her to retire. They were waiting for her to disappear. The transition from suspicion to certainty was a physical sensation, a cold weight settling in the pit of Eleanor's stomach. She thought back to the countless mornings she had spent feeling sluggish and confused, the way Alistair had gently steered her away from important meetings, and the subtle hints Vivienne had dropped to the board of directors about Eleanor's failing mental state. They hadn't been protecting her legacy, they had been dismantling her life. Eleanor stood up, feigning a sudden need for a document from her private safe in the adjacent study. "Excuse me for a moment, I need the original charter for the foundation," she said, her movements deliberate and controlled. Once inside the study, Eleanor didn't go to the safe. She went to the internal security monitor, a system Arthur had installed years ago that most people had forgotten existed. The cameras in the boardroom were hidden within the ornate moulding of the ceiling, providing a clear, high-definition view of the table. She watched as Vivienne pulled a small glass vial from her pocket and expertly squeezed several drops of a clear liquid into the fresh cup of coffee. She watched as Alistair checked his watch, his face devoid of any concern for his mother, his eyes only reflecting an impatient greed. She watched as they shared a look, a silent communication of conspiratorial triumph. It was a betrayal so complete that Eleanor felt a part of her soul wither and die in that darkened study. But Eleanor Thorne was not a woman who allowed herself to be a victim. She had built an empire from nothing, and she would not let it be stolen by the very person she had intended to give it to. She picked up her private phone and dialed a number she had never thought she would need, the direct line to a former head of security who now ran a private investigative firm. "Marcus, I need you at the penthouse in 10 minutes and bring a forensic technician," she whispered into the receiver. "I have a chemical spill that needs immediate analysis." She then dialed the police, her voice steady and cold as she reported an attempted homicide in progress. When she returned to the boardroom, she was the picture of corporate grace. She sat back down and looked at the fresh cup of coffee Vivienne placed before her. "Thank you, Vivienne. You're always so thoughtful," Eleanor said, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She picked up the pen, her hand steady. Alistair leaned in, the document positioned perfectly before her. "Here, Mother. Just initial the first 12 pages and sign at the bottom of the final sheet. Then it's done. You can finally rest." Eleanor looked at him, searching for even a flicker of the little boy she had tucked into bed during thunderstorms, the child who had once promised to protect her forever. She found nothing but the cold, calculating gaze of a stranger. Just as her pen touched the paper, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. Marcus entered first, followed by 2 uniformed officers and a technician carrying a specialized kit. Alistair bolted upright, his face draining of color. "Mother, what is the meaning of this? We're in the middle of a private family meeting." Eleanor didn't look at him. She looked at Vivienne, who was attempting to surreptitiously move the coffee cup toward the edge of the table. "Leave the cup, Vivienne Eleanor," said her voice, echoing with the authority of a woman who had spent a lifetime in command. "Detective, I would like this liquid tested for arsenic or any other heavy metals. And I would like my son and his wife removed from my sight." The chaos that followed was a whirlwind of forensic swabs, legal warnings, and the frantic, shrill denials of a woman who knew her world was crumbling. Vivienne was taken into custody immediately after the technician confirmed the presence of a highly concentrated toxic agent in the coffee. Alistair, however, was a different story. He sat in the back of the patrol car, his head bowed, his silence more damning than any scream could have been. As the sirens faded into the distance, Eleanor sat alone in the boardroom, the silence of the penthouse feeling heavier than it ever had before. Sophia approached her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Eleanor. They can't hurt you anymore." But the hurt was only beginning. The investigation into Alistair and Vivienne's activities revealed a web of deceit that spanned years. They hadn't just been poisoning Eleanor, they had been systematically looting the company's offshore accounts, diverting millions of dollars into private portfolios in the Cayman Islands. They had taken out a $5 million life insurance policy on Eleanor only months prior, a policy that would have paid out double in the event of an accidental death. They had even bribed a local pharmacist to provide the toxins under a false prescription. Every layer of the investigation revealed a new depth of depravity, a new level of cold-blooded calculation that made Eleanor's blood run cold. The trial was a media circus, a tabloid sensation that saw the Thorne name dragged through the mud. Eleanor was forced to testify, to sit in a witness box and recount the months of her own slow, agonizing decline at the hands of her own child. She watched as Alistair's defense team tried to paint him as a victim of Vivienne's manipulative genius, claiming he had no knowledge of the poisoning and only participated in the financial irregularities out of fear for his wife's mental state. But the evidence was insurmountable. Sophia had not only warned Eleanor that morning, she had been keeping her own secret record, a diary of observations that documented every time she saw Vivienne in the kitchen, every time she found a hidden vial in the trash, and every conversation she overheard about the acceleration of Elia's illness. The most devastating moment of the trial came when the prosecution played a recording from the penthouse's hidden security system, a recording Eleanor hadn't even known existed. It captured a conversation between Alistair and Vivienne in the kitchen 2 nights before the intended signing. "Do you think she'll last until the morning?" Alistair's voice asked, his tone bored and impatient. "She's tougher than she looks," Vivienne had replied with a chilling laugh. "But the dose tomorrow will be the final one. We'll have the signature of the company and the insurance. Then we can finally leave this miserable city behind." Hearing those words, hearing the casual indifference with which her son discussed her murder, was the final blow to Eleanor's heart. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts for both Alistair and Vivienne. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, their names erased from the Thorne legacy they had been so desperate to inherit. In the aftermath of the sentencing, Eleanor found herself at a crossroads. The company was in turmoil, her reputation was tarnished, and her family was gone. Many expected her to finally sell the business and retreat into a life of quiet seclusion. But Eleanor Thorne was not finished yet. She spent the next 5 years rebuilding Thorne Global Dynamics, not as a monument to her own power, but as a force for good. She replaced the board of directors with individuals of proven integrity. She established a massive profit-sharing program for her factory workers, and she turned the Thorne Foundation into a global leader in the fight against elder abuse and financial exploitation. She realized that her experience, as painful as it was, had given her a unique perspective on the vulnerabilities of the elderly, even those with wealth and influence. She became a tireless advocate for legal reform, testifying before Congress and helping to pass legislation that provided greater protections for seniors against predatory family members. Sophia remained by her side, not as a housekeeper, but as a trusted advisor and the executive director of Foundation's outreach programs. They lived in a smaller, sunnier home on the outskirts of the city, a place filled with laughter and the scent of fresh lavender rather than the heavy, oppressive memories of the penthouse. Eleanor found a new kind of family in the people she helped, the hundreds of seniors who had been saved from similar fates by the work of her foundation. She learned that while the betrayal of a child is a wound that never truly heals, the love of a chosen family can provide a different kind of strength, a resilience that is built on mutual respect and shared purpose. As Eleanor approached her 80th birthday, she sat in her garden watching the sunset over the Illinois plains. She thought about the cup of coffee that had been meant to be her last and the woman who had dared to break it. She realized that the true legacy of the Thorne name wasn't in the steel or the glass or the millions of dollars in the bank. It was in the lives she had touched, the justice she had fought for, and the simple, unwavering truth that integrity is the only thing that truly survives the test of time. Her son Alistair died in prison 3 years later, a victim of a respiratory infection he was too weak to fight. Eleanor did not attend the funeral. She sent a single wreath of white lilies and a donation to a literacy program in the prison's name. She had forgiven him long ago, not for his sake, but for her own, so that she wouldn't have to carry the weight of his hatred into her final years. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean allowing the poison of his choices to continue to infect her life. She had made her choice, and she had found peace in the architecture of a life built on truth. The lesson Eleanor Thorne left for the world was one of profound humanity. She taught that we must never allow our love for our children to blind us to their character, and that we must always be vigilant in protecting our own dignity. She showed that even the most devastating betrayal can be a catalyst for a greater purpose, and that the strongest foundations are not built on blood, but on the unwavering commitment to what is right. In the end, Eleanor's life was not defined by the poison she was given, but by the medicine she became for a world that so desperately needed her strength. The Thorne Global Dynamics building still stands in the heart of Chicago, a testament to a woman's vision and a survivor's grit. But the true monument to Eleanor is found in the quiet corners of small towns across the country, where elderly men and women now live in safety and security because of the laws she helped to pass and the foundation she built. Her story is told in the training manuals of police departments and the boardrooms of corporations, a reminder that power without integrity is a hollow shell, and that the greatest strength is found in the courage to speak the truth even when it is whispered by a housekeeper over a broken cup of coffee. Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84, her hand held by Sophia, the woman who had saved her life twice, once from poison and once from despair. Her final words were not about the company or the money or the betrayal she had endured. They were about the light, the beautiful golden light of a life, lived well, a life that had finally found its true north. The Thorne legacy continues not as an empire of steel, but as a beacon of hope, a reminder that even the most bitter brew can be transformed into a wellspring of grace, if we only have the courage to trust our instincts and the strength to stand for what is just. As the years passed, the story of the Thorne betrayal became a legend, a cautionary tale taught in business schools and law seminars. It served as a stark reminder that the greatest threats to a legacy often come from within, and that the most important duty of a leader is to cultivate a culture of honesty and accountability. But for those who knew Eleanor personally, the story was something more. It was a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most profound grief and to find a new path forward guided by the light of integrity and the warmth of a chosen family. The garden where Eleanor spent her final years is now a public sanctuary, a place where people can come to sit in the sun and reflect on the beauty of a life lived with purpose. In the center of the garden stands a simple stone fountain, its water clear and constant, a symbol of the purity of Eleanor's spirit. On the base of the fountain is a single inscription, a quote from Eleanor herself that perfectly summarizes the wisdom she gained through her journey. "We are not defined by the betrayal we suffer, but by the integrity we choose to uphold in its wake. Love may be blind, but justice must always have its eyes wide open." This was the final victory of Eleanor Thorne, the woman who refused to be poisoned by the greed of others and who instead chose to nourish the world with her own resilience. Her story is a reminder to us all that no matter how dark the night may seem, there is always a path back to the light, and that the most enduring legacies are those built on the foundation of a heart that refuses to be broken. In every cup of coffee, shared in friendship, in every act of loyalty, and in every stand for justice, the spirit of Eleanor Thorne lives on, a quiet, powerful force for good in a world that so often forgets the value of a simple, honest life. The Foundation continues its work today, led by a new generation of advocates who share Eleanor's commitment to justice. They provide legal assistance to the vulnerable, they fund research into the prevention of elder abuse, and they offer support to those who have been betrayed by the very people they trusted most. The work is difficult and often heartbreaking, but it is also deeply rewarding, a constant reminder of the impact one person can have when they choose to turn their pain into purpose. Sophia lived to a ripe old age, eventually retiring to a quiet seaside cottage in Maine, where she spent her days painting the ocean and thinking of the friend who had become her sister. She knew that she had done something extraordinary that morning in the penthouse, but to her it was simply an act of love, the only response possible when faced with the cold calculation of evil. As we look at the world today, we can see the ripples of Eleanor's life in the laws that protect the elderly, in the ethical standards of the aerospace industry, and in the hearts of those who have been inspired by her story. She was a woman of her time, yet her message is timeless. She reminds us that our true worth is not in what we have, but in who we are, and that the greatest achievement is to live a life that leaves the world a little brighter, a little safer, and a little more just than we found it. This is the enduring lesson of the Thorne legacy, a legacy that began with a broken cup of coffee and ended with a world transformed by the power of integrity and the resilience of the human soul. The sun has long since set on the Thorne penthouse, the stained glass windows now dark and silent. But the light that Eleanor Thorne brought into the world continues to shine, a steady, unwavering flame that guides us toward a future where every person is valued, every life is protected, and every heart is given the chance to find its own true north. Her story is a masterpiece of survival, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most profound betrayal and to find a way back to the light. It is a story for all of us, a reminder that we are all architects of our own legacy, and that the most beautiful structures are those built on the foundation of a heart that refuses to be poisoned by anything but love.